Let's get into this conversation now. The Economic Freedom Fighters says it's willing to assist convicted 2021 unrest instigator Mdumiseni Zuma, who has been sentenced to 12 years in prison. In a tweet, EFF leader Julius Malema says the party's KZN chairperson will engage with Zuma as they believe that his 12-year imprisonment was due to a lack of proper legal representation. Now, the 36-year-old was found guilty on both counts of inciting people to disturb peace and inciting public violence. It follows a video that he recorded instructing people to loot and destroy the Brookside Mall in Pietermaritzburg. Let's speak now to EFF spokesperson Sinawo Tambo, who joins us via the virtual platform. Mr. Tambo, thank you very much for your time. Can I begin with this question? Does the EFF support violent protest in the country?
Look, it's got nothing to do with the support or lack thereof of violent protest. It's simply observing that someone has been grossly misrepresented on a matter where the context is much larger. It includes vigilante groups having killed people, vigilante groups racially profiling people from entering communities. We haven't seen a single conviction in that regard. The Indians who murdered people in Phoenix, brothers, 2 of them were acquitted, even though they were actively hunting people to their death during the protests of July 21st. So for someone who is essentially charged for inciting the looting of cabbages and all sorts of goods which are related to food and speak to direct hunger of our people, seems like a ridiculous conclusion to give him 12 years in our view. And of course, we have engaged our KZN structure to interact with him and see how best we can assist with legal representation. So let's view that conviction in the context of the lack of convictions of those who killed people in Phoenix, those who were hunting people, the vigilante groups that were gating communities, and allowing access or lack thereof as a result of your race. That's the context in which we're speaking, and that's the context in which we think an intervention is necessary.
Okay, I'm going to request that we separate the two issues. Yes, they regard the same incident of the 2021 July unrest. However, there is a conviction here of a person who has now been proven in a court of law to have incited violence, and that violence resulted in the destruction of property amounting to millions of rand. But here's my question. The EFF, what is your position on violent protests in the country?
Actually, to separate them is very mischievous. Like, they're inseparable. That's the context in which we think an intervention is necessary.
Mr. Tambo.
But of course, if you're asking us, well, you've asked me a question, I'm responding. Don't be sensationalist. I'm answering your question.
Okay.
Number one, it's mischievous to separate the two, because that's the context in which we think an intervention is necessary. Number two, the EFF is very clear on its position on the necessity of violence in order to wage a revolution and its importance in all revolutions historically, not only in South Africa, in the continent and the world. And there'll be instances where violence is necessary to wage a revolution. Now, whether the July 21st riots of 2021 were constituting a revolution or counter-revolution or not is an issue for political debate. But if you're going to want us to condemn the uproar of our people when they are aggrieved by something, that is not something we're going to do. And I think that's the type of questioning that you are leading now. We're not going to condemn any violent protests. Protests exist in their own form and nature, to serve their own political law.
And that's why I didn't ask you the question in that way, Mr. Tambo. That's why I did not ask you the question in that way. I didn't ask you whether you condemn this. I simply asked, does the EFF have a position on violent protests in South Africa in general?
No, the EFF is a grassroots movement. We're a protest movement, and the way in which our people seek to express themselves, be it students on campuses, be it our people who are protesting for lack of service delivery, be it people who are protesting what they deemed an unjust arrest of someone who wasn't taken to trial and was simply sent to jail. The way our people seek to express ourselves is part and parcel of the democratic fabric and history of South Africa. That's how our democracy has been born, through rolling protests, peaceful and violent. So our position is that we support our people as long as their protests do not result in a direct harm to life. There's no protest, in fact, that is inciting killing of anyone. But our people express themselves and apply pressure to achieve social political results in any manner that they deem fit. So the EFF, that's our position in that regard. There's nothing ambiguous about it.
Okay, so let me tackle it this way then. So the EFF will not necessarily take a position on violent protests, or perhaps it does, but as long as that violent protest does not result in a death of another person, then it's okay. If you're saying that, let me tell you what that court has said about the destruction of that property. And it is that this amounted to 500 million rand in destruction of property. But perhaps bringing the matter to the impact it has on the communities that depended on this mall. If you read the Sowetan newspaper this morning, they're saying that several communities depended on that mall, including 5,000 people who went there to collect their social grant every month. Does that matter to the EFF?
It should matter to anyone, but we must also explore the causes of that protest. Like, it was the irresponsibility of a judge of whose political motivations, it was the irresponsibility of a ruling government that wanted to prove a point by incarcerating an individual without taking him to trial, by incarcerating an individual whereas there's no beneficial value of having incarcerated him. It should concern all of us, but you are trying to isolate incidences and isolate phenomena and situations from their causal factors. And it doesn't work like that. Like, the damage happened. We're not going to applaud the damage in the protests that happened in that regard, but there's causal factors that led to them. And to try and separate those causal factors from that damage that resulted in that regard is irresponsible. There was protest because someone was deemed by a majority of our people that he was arrested unjustly.
You've just
and
said,
protests
Mr. Tambo,
protests have casualties. You're not going to speak alone. So you see, the skill of interviewing people, Claude, is that you interviewing the EFF because you want to hear the view of the EFF. The people are not looking for your view. They're looking for mine. Otherwise, you could have narrated this conversation. So you can't separate the causal factors to what caused those uproars and then simply want to ask us as political parties to condemn the damages that come out of an uprising. Those damages happen. Those are casualties of what people deem a revolution, or whether it was a revolution or not is a matter of debate. But that happens. I mean, the calls to disinvest from the apartheid regime, there were cries that this is going to harm the economy of South Africa and affect the black people who are being segregated even more. Revolutions, protests, uprisings have those forms of casualties. But we are saying that this sentence for this individual, in the context where people were being killed by racist vigilante groups, in the context where people were being racially profiled, and those individuals were either acquitted or have not been pursued, it's a witch hunt, it's a part and parcel of possibly irresponsible legal representation, and it's something we must intervene in. I'm not sure why there's some panic or characterization of the EFF endorsing 500 million worth of damages to property, when we're saying someone did not have adequate legal representation. So must be afforded that opportunity. So everyone should be. Okay. So I'm not sure why it's a problem.
So here's the thing. Here's what you have suggested, and I will put it to you as a contradiction. So yours is a grassroots organization. You've just said that. And yours is concerned with ensuring that people who are the poorest of the poor get some kind of help. And so 5,000 social grant collectors, those would be people that I would assume you care about, who now possibly have to travel longer distances to go and collect their social grant. There's another element that you keep referring to, and that is that this person was not represented. There was no trial. He was simply sent to jail. The understanding is that he did have a lawyer. Yours is that he may not have had a good legal representation, and that is why you're offering your possible help here. But mine has to do with the very people that you claim to represent, and that is the grassroots. So should we accept that they are mere casualties of a revolution, those 5,000 social grant collectors?
No, we shouldn't. We should, in fact, hold accountable the characters and role players who practically engineered this uprising by their irresponsibility and political vendettas. And the EFF has done that. We stood against the key role player into those uprisings, Raymond Zondo, his appointment as the Chief Justice. When we were fighting his appointment, we were representing those 5,000 people who can't access their social grants. Because it was Raymond Zondo's irresponsibility that led to those uprisings. It was Raymond Zondo's political vendetta, his impatience, his quest to prove a point that led to the uprisings that saw those 5,000 social grant workers, social grant recipients today having to find alternative means of accessing their grants. We represented our people by holding accountable the critical role players, not sentencing someone who said go and steal cabbage to 12 years in prison. That is stupid. So if we want to hold power accountable, that has led to the disaster that happened in the July uprisings. Let's hold key role players accountable, not inciters of the theft of oranges and bananas. Raymond Zondo is responsible for the uprisings of July 2021. And that is who we've located as a central figure in that regard. So if you want to ask me, if we're representing our people, we represent them by opposing those who created that massacre and disastrous situation.
Okay. All right. So the EFF is keen to represent its people. So two questions in one. What do you say to those 5,000 social grant collectors who you and I have just agreed probably right now they have to travel longer distances to collect their monthly grant? But second of all, the EFF, what have you done since those people that were responsible for the killing of people in Phoenix, you have said that they were let go? What has your party done to ensure that they are rearrested and they come back to account for what they are alleged to have done?
Look, we say to the 5,000 social grant recipients who have been affected by an uprising that was a result of political infighting within the African National Congress and the irresponsibility of our Chief Justice, that they must register to vote and vote in 2024 and vote for the EFF. If they want to never be subjected to that irresponsibility, they must elect a government that won't navigate or create or architect such a situation. Number two, the EFF is the only political party. When the DA said that the people, the vigilantes of Phoenix are heroes, it was the EFF that marched into Phoenix and marched, calling for the arrest of those individuals. And the arrest of those two Indian brothers was a product of that massive protest. They have now been acquitted earlier this year. We will explore the opportunities as to how we can ensure they're held accountable. But those Phoenix people are not forgotten. There's the EFF that has stood alone. There's the EFF that has stood alone, calling for their arrest. They were arrested as a product of our protests. Our court processes have failed by ensuring that they're held accountable, and the fact that only 2 of them were arrested when there was a massive human manhunt of African people, burning of their shacks, is ridiculous. So let's not underestimate the impact of our grassroots protest that headed into Phoenix immediately after those massacres had happened. And of course, we're not going to let that struggle go, and we're still in pursuit of it. So we can't be faulted either way.
Now, Tambo, let me thank you very much for your time, and the message is clear from the EFF then. Those casualties of a revolution, as he puts it, they must vote the EFF. Not my words. His words. That's not to say that we give a free platform here to campaign, but that is his response to you who may have been affected by the burning down of that mall.